Bye, mijo, bye. Now it's time for Professor John. John, where are you? Okay. And Christine will help us with the introduction. Christine, are you there?
Good morning. Yes. Thank you, Carolina.
I can
I
see
just want.
you.
Okay, you want to see me? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Well,
morning. Good morning, everybody.
here is Professor John, and I'd like to say thank you, John, for being today since very early, and just appreciate all you are doing for us. Now, Christine will.
I'm going to give an introduction to
Yes.
the Honorable Professor John Victor Rautenbach. I hope I said that correctly. So he's a professor and head of the Department of Social Work at the University of Zululand for the past 4 years. He's a professional social worker registered with the South African Council for Social Service Professions, the SACSSP. He was previously the head of the Department for Social Work and Social Development at the University of Fort Hare, where he worked for 18 years. He has also served as a member of Senate, Faculty Board, Faculty Planning Committee, Teaching and Learning Committee, Community Engagement Committee, Recognition of Prior Learning Committee, Promotions Committee, and HR Recruitment Interview Panels, and the Higher Degrees Committee, and also served on the Institutional Research and Ethics Committee. He's a former executive committee member of the Association of South African Social Work Education Institution, the IASSW-AIETS. He has also served as a board member of the International Association of Schools and Social Work, the IASSW, where he was the co-chair and governance task force, a member of the Budget and Finance Committee, and continues as the chair of the Standing Committee on the World Census of Social Work Programs. The Directory of Schools of Social Work has recently been published. He currently serves as the IASSW Research Committee. His teaching and research areas include Introduction to Social Work, Social Justice and Human Rights, Relationships, Marriage and Family Transitions, and developing the marital life course perspective, the clinical social work, casework, the youth at risk / restorative justice / the Child Justice Act, community development and entrepreneurship, social work research and leadership. He's also an interest in interpretive phenomenal analysis, concept analysis, evidence-based practice, reference management training, and international education. And with that introduction, I would pass it over to Professor John to hear his speech. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Christine, for that introduction. I wasn't expecting my whole CV to be read, Carolina. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we can get this process started. Right, so on the screen now, you should see my first slide of the presentation. Please confirm that you can see that.
Yes.
And I'm audible. Right, so thank you very much for this invitation, and congratulations on putting together such a broad themed conference. I'm very, very excited to be part of this, and I'm so glad that we met in person in Panama at the international conference a few months ago. So to introduce my topic, Today, I'll be talking about clinical social work. In fact, the definition of clinical social work was launched by the International Association of Schools of Social Work officially as a document for discussion in 2023. And I'm going to try and link some of the definition to clinical social work related to working with couples and relationships. However, part of my goal for this session is to really orientate the audience, and particularly the Latin American audience in South America, to the International Association of Schools of Social Work and to the specific definition of clinical social work. And I hope that it forms a useful foundation for the rest of your conference. So I'd like to say that the definition of clinical social work fits perfectly within your broad conference theme, where you're very much focusing on people-centered clinical social work and diverse approaches in clinical social work practice. So as I was introduced, my name is John Rautenbach. It's a German surname. However, my family have been in South Africa since 1757. What I have tried to do is introduce myself and my slides in both English and in Spanish. And my CV has already been written, but I really want to point out that I'm a big fan of international social work and have served as a board member and continue to work very closely with many amazing people in the International Association of Schools of Social Work. When people see me often and they hear my voice, they cannot believe that I am from Africa. And one of our speakers later, Mpumi, is also South African, and he looks very different. Here's a little joke that was circulated on an international news network during the very famous 2010 Football World Cup, where they said the World Cup is happening in South Africa, and then they put up a map of South America. And people even get confused where South Africa is. That's a clue is in the name. We're right at the bottom part of the continent of Africa. And I come to you today from a little village called Kwadlangezwa, which is where the University of Zululand is based. My one research passion and interest, and the core of my postgraduate research in social work, is around relationship and couples. And as I said, I'm going to try and link the international definition of clinical social work to some concepts related to marriage work. And so on the screen now, you can see the titles of, firstly at the top, my PhD, which was titled The Development of the Marital Life Course Perspective as a Conceptual Framework for Developing and Understanding Marital Life Events and Marital Transitions. And I'm very proud to have received that degree from the University of Nelson Mandela in Gqeberha. It used to be called Port Elizabeth. I did a master's degree before that, and the title there was The Strengths of Enduring Marriages, Overcoming Severe Stress. And if we have time towards the end, I'll put up the abstracts to both of these pieces of research, and we'll retrofit and try and tie in more to the definition. Right, but to tell you a little bit about the context of my research is I really try and understand marriage and relationships within the broader societal context. And we can see that even royal weddings have a massive story. There's young love in the form of Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, who married Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, and then Prince Albert from Monaco, who married later in life and was this notorious playboy and young bachelor. And then he married a South African Olympic swimmer, Princess Charlene. And then, of course, we've got other examples, such as Princess Diana, who married Prince Charles, and later he divorced her to marry his true love, Camilla. And there's lots of controversy and stories there as they went through a marital life course transition. And that's really at the heart of the kind of work that I do in the marriage and relationship space, to try and understand how people go through transitions between different stages and statuses of relationships. Right, so moving on now to ground me in South Africa, and I mentioned that I'm graduated from the University of Nelson Mandela, and maybe this is one of the famous exports or links into South Africa. Everyone knows Nelson Mandela, and you know that he also had two wives. Firstly, his first wife, Winnie Mandela, who was with him all the way through his imprisonment and the difficult stress and political turmoil that he lived through until he became the first democratically elected president of South Africa. And later, he married Gracia Machel, who was in fact the wife of another political president of Mozambique. And so, yeah, we've got just some images of those transitions and how those relationships defined this man's great love. My next task is to orientate the audience to the International Association of Schools of Social Work. And this is an organization which is got a lot of history. And so I'm going to quickly just show you the website. Carolina, if you can just confirm that I've moved that now to the website of the IASSW.
Yeah,
And
so
the IASSW, I just want to read their vision statement. Their vision is to promote and develop excellence in social work education, research, and scholarship across the globe in pursuit of a more just and equitable world. It's a global international organization, and it was formed in 1928 at the same time as two other very, very important international organizations that they work very closely with. And we honor the International Federation of Social Workers, who is a global body looking after the interests of practitioners, social work practitioners, where the IASSW is linked to social work educators. And then at the same time, in 1928, the organization called the International Council on Social Welfare was established. So these three organizations were started at the same time. The ICSW looks after and represents all the NGOs and directors of NGOs around the world. The IFSW, social work practitioners, really the largest body representing social work in the world. And then the IASSW, which oversees social work education. And they do this in a number of ways in collaboration with the other two international organizations. And I want to take a little bit of time to discuss this, because my visit to Panama opened my eyes to where many people in South America are in terms of their formalization of social work education and training. And there are major movements towards regulation, formalizing curriculums. And I'm so glad that our colleague from Japan spoke about some of the diversity of social work practice in Japan. And I believe that to be true in the Latin American context and South American context too. So if you look at this international website and hover over this section, there's a global social work documents. Together with the International Federation, the International Council, and the International Association of Schools of Social Work, They've collaborated extensively to set the tone and provide clarity for some of the big issues that social work grapples with. One of them is purely the definition of social work. What is social work? What is the scope of practice for social workers? What do social workers do? And how do social workers compare to other helping professions, such as psychologists? Then we've got the ethical statement. And this ethical statement has been adapted for international and local contexts, but it's an overall arching statement on the ethics of what social workers are expected to do and the kind of work and moral conduct for social work practice. Then there's the global standards for social work education and training. And this document provides a benchmarking activity and exercise for universities and anyone wanting to train social workers. It does not necessarily provide a curriculum, but it provides standards for which those curriculums can be aligned. And it's very important that we move the global education and training of social workers in the same field, in the same direction, in various contexts and countries. Then, what I'm going to be talking about today, and you'll see on the screen there, the IASSW definition on clinical social work. It's part of the website. It's there for anyone to download and link to. And I strongly encourage you to go to the website and link and follow along if you're able to. Then, of course, there's the global agenda for social work. And this is a very powerful process that unifies social workers in their quest for globalization and some kind of standardized amalgamating perspective. Every 2 years, the theme changes. And in Panama, we celebrated a new theme for social work to focus on for the next 2 years. And then finally, the global social work research statement. And I was very fortunate to be asked to be part of the research committee that fine-tuned the update of the statement, which it was after 10 years, we updated the wording, and then we presented it to the General Assembly to a unanimous vote in Panama. But this is an important website. I encourage everybody to go and have a look at it. This is what the clinical social work website section looks like. You can download the document there. There's other important research statements that I was talking about, and then a lot of other information in the website. So I'm not going to go into that anymore. Let me remove that from the screen. But I thought it's very important to lay the foundation for my talk to explain who and what the IASSW is. So please take time to explore and download those very significant resources for social work practice on the website. So my goal is to talk about the definition of clinical social work and try and link it to some marriage and practice work and couples and relationship work. But let's just say this definition was not easy to come up with. A lot of effort went into it, many hours of collaboration and debate to really contextualize and summarize what clinical social work is, so that we can understand its definition, the theoretical components that go into clinical and social work, and its context for practice and ultimately some employment areas where clinical social workers can work. It was presented at the board in Porto in the meeting held in 2023 and unanimously accepted. One thing that we need to know is that the IASSW encourages regions and countries and national organizations to dissect their statements, to make contributions and to adapt them for regional amplification that are in accordance with the spirit and the intent of the statement. So you might decide as a Latin or a South American organization of schools of social work or social work practitioners to try and take this statement and develop your own flavor for clinical social work. So let's dive into what clinical social work is. And I'm drawing directly from the document that is available on the IASSW website. So clinical social work, firstly, is a specialized area of practice within social work. At the bottom there, I've said its focus is mostly in the casework method, which we would call micro-level practice. Clinical social work aligns with the global definition of social work, the International Federation and International Associations definition from 2014. It promotes human functioning and well-being, which are critical for achieving social change and development, social cohesion, and empowerment, and the liberation of people. And at a very micro level, one of the things that clinical social workers want to do is we want to liberate people, liberate them from their own challenges, their own mind, their own struggles with their emotions, their relationships, and bring about emotional and physical and social well-being. Clinical social work is practiced primarily at the level with the individual and with couples and with families. And that's really the heart of practice, where you're dealing with one or two people. In some cases, that may extend to group therapeutic interventions at the meso level, and to some degree, clinical social workers may engage in direct face-to-face practice rather than at the level where it is explicitly aimed at promoting change at organizational, community, societal, and international levels. But you'll see just in the statement that do talk about clinical social workers using their skills at even the community level. But for the purposes of this presentation, I really want to emphasize that clinical work is generally focused at the individual and the couple level, that face-to-face practice at the micro level of social work intervention, which we normally call casework. Not group work, not community work or community development, but generally the caseworker would have those clinical social work skills, and we'll talk about the training soon. So what do clinical social workers do? Clinical social workers conduct diagnosis and assessment and deliver therapeutic-orientated social pedagogical interventions, and that includes educational interventions. So some therapy orientation and others education. There is a clear line and distinction between the work that social workers in clinical settings do and what psychologists do. And so I'm very reluctant to use or support that word diagnosis, but certainly there is a level of assessment and looking at providing other clinical practitioners like psychologists and psychiatrists in a larger setting with more data. And in South Africa, we've got to move through our national association, the South African Council for Social Service Professions, which is our regulatory body. Just earlier this week, we attended continuous professional development training, and that focus was on ecometric assessment, using questionnaires to be able to help us make assessments for clients so that we can ensure the best level of care. And so our regulatory body is behind helping social workers in South Africa develop instruments and tools and benchmark those tools to make sure that we got the resources available to be able to make professional assessments. At its core, clinical interventions address mental health, emotional and behavioral issues and may include work related to alcohol and drugs. At the individual level, when I talk about relationship work, clinical social workers want to help couples improve their relationships. And you'll see from my own research and my own practice background, that may include strengthening couples who are in distress and helping them navigate that distress so that their relationships can be strengthened. Sometimes it's at the premarital stage, helping young engaged couples develop the strengths and tools to be able to strengthen their future marriages. And in other contexts, it might be helping people separate, or people who have already separated go through a very emotionally distressing divorce process. So depending on the factors such as the theoretical orientation of the practitioner and the practice context, they may also provide clinical services to individuals and families experiencing crises and relationship issues, and intervene in aspects of the environment and the systems that those people live in. Some practitioners engage in clinical social work as part of their social intervention efforts to influence larger policy, political systems, structural and societal structures and processes. But as I said earlier, most clinical social work is focused at the individual micro level practice. Okay, so the training of clinical social work. And this is why I really felt it important to speak on behalf of the IASSW to talk about this formal definition, because as practitioners, as social workers in the South American context, I want to encourage you all to take your own training and education very seriously. The university systems differ from country to country, and I'll give you some examples. But in South America, you might have to look at alternative training scenarios that can skill you in individual level practice. And I'm very glad for an organization like CAPA Social Work and Carolina, who has a mission to educate and bring world-class speakers to the audiences in South America and present this training in Spanish that becomes a lot more accessible. So I really want to encourage you to take responsibility for your own training. If you are not sure of your skill set, develop the skills, go on training, buy the books, read. If you can, register for advanced degrees in social work and clinical social work in other contexts, you should do that. But clinical social work preparation emphasizes very specific knowledge and skills to conduct diagnosis and assessment and to deliver therapeutic and education-oriented interventions. Now you can see that's not something you just wake up able to do. Work with marriage and couples and individuals, especially within the mental health setting, requires a very specific training and skill set. And you can develop those skills through reading and through attending short courses and your continuous professional development. This training requires advanced education and training beyond the bachelor degree level. And I understand that it's different in different contexts. So here are some examples that are actually embedded in the definition. In America and in Canada, practitioners will obtain a master's degree in social work, and they'll have specializations in clinical practice from social work education programs that provides very specific master's degrees called clinical social work specializations. In countries like Australia, the master's degree is the initial qualifying degree for social work. That means someone could have done nursing in undergrad or sociology in undergrad, and then they do a master's degree in social work. And then they must be completed to have the credentials to be called a clinical social worker, a social worker. Social work education programs in other countries typically do not have clinical specializations. Many countries don't have master's degrees in clinical social work. You'll have a master's degree in social work, maybe even a research degree in social work. But that opens up your ability to research and think and be committed to lifelong learning so that you can access other resources and training opportunities. For example, in Finland, all social workers must have a master's degree to be licensed by their regulatory body, and so that they can practice as social workers. And in some cases, they may be employed in settings addressing mental health and substance abuse. So I'll give you an example of a particular training that you could consider if you had a very specific interest in training your skills in working with relationships and marriage. And so the Gotham Institute, that's their website there, provides certificate training in various aspects of relationship interventions. And I'm a big fan of this institute and the work they do. I'm not associated to them anyway, so I'm not making an advert, but I want you to use that as an example. Really find research and evidence-based training that can enhance your skill level and your own training, whether it is when you're working with people with disabilities or people in relationships or children and youth. There's amazing international programs that will be able to advance your capacity as a social worker when you're doing casework at the individual and clinical level. Right, moving on then. What are the theoretical perspectives? And there are 3 slides related to this part of the definition document that the IASSW released in 2023. So this is new stuff. But I want to give you the context. And I also want to point out how important it is to find your local theoretical orientation for the South American context. So there's a myriad, many different theoretical perspectives that inform clinical social work. In the Anglo and American context, many of these approaches have been borrowed from other professions, such as sociology, demographic studies, and psychology in particular. They include systems and ecological perspectives, psychodynamic theory, attachment theory, cognitive behavioral theory, crisis intervention models, task-centered models, even motivational interviewing, strength and empowerment perspectives, feminist perspectives, trauma-informed approaches to social work, which all encompass anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices. So it's a vast range of theoretical orientations that shape clinical social work. Other approaches, such as narrative therapy and solution-based or focus therapy, have their origins in social work. In the European context, much of direct social work practice is based on education rather than on psychological focused interventions. And part of our role as practitioners, as clinical social workers, is to provide information to our clients so that they can use that information to make life-changing decisions and well-informed decisions that are based on evidence and practice-informed modalities. So what else can we say about the theoretical perspectives undergirding the clinical social work frame of reference? Firstly, we must understand that there's no agreed or general agreement on the theoretical perspectives that should be used. There's no textbook that says this is how you are a clinical social worker. You can take your training and your background. And you can select theories based on many factors, including your education, your own values and personal and professional preferences, and of course, the requirements of your job, wherever you find yourself working as a social worker, that'll shape the decisions you make in terms of the theoretical orientation. Of course, in countries that are highly regulated, like South Africa, where we've got a council that all social workers have to pay a fee with, so that they can have a license to practice. Those theoretical orientations will help you maintain your license to practice and meet the standards set by those regulators. Some of these perspectives and models, theories and approaches provide psychological explanations, while others emphasize structural and systemic explanations for difficulties that people find and experience. And that's really, really important to understand, that we're both looking at the psychology and the system, the environment in which people find themselves. One good resource that the definition actually names is the Clinical Social Work Journal, the Clinical Social Work Journal. And I would really recommend that you go look up this journal on the website, because it continues to publish journal articles that are peer-reviewed and scientific and showcase the various theories and research that social workers in clinical settings use. And you can really learn a lot from that journal. It's a resource that I would encourage you to look at. Since the theories informing clinical practice are grounded primarily in the Western cultures, it is incumbent on clinical practitioners to ensure that these theories are adapted for practice within their own cultures. In addition, indigenous knowledge and other culturally appropriate theories should be incorporated into practice with diverse populations, including local populations, different cultures, including working with immigrants and indigenous people. And this is critical for you, whether you are in Chile or Panama or Peru or wherever you find yourself, to make sure that you're taking the theory that informs clinical social work and you're finding ways to make it contextual and relevant to your clients that you serve. There may be very different ways of working with marriage and couples in distress that only you would understand in your country because of the different roles that are assigned to men and women in relationships. And yeah, I could not give you insight into what to do because you'd have to understand it from your own local context. The obligations include promoting and protecting the rights of their clients and ensuring that their voices, their lived experience and needs, their aspirations are accounted for in practical decisions and interventions. And I missed a paragraph there, but essentially all the work that you do as social workers in clinical settings have to meet the ethical norms and standards of social work, which are based on the values and principles. And obviously, we want your practice to be supported by evidence. Right, moving on then. What is the context for clinical social work? Right, as with all other practice areas in social work, social, cultural, economic, and political contextual factors influence clinical social work education and practice. This specialization is readily available in high-income countries identified with or influenced by Anglo-American culture. The American context, the British context have long regulated the way that social workers practice, and certainly in many of the Commonwealth countries, there are these highly regulated environments. and training expectations for social work. In America, they've got the highest number of Masters of Social Work degree programs in the world, and that these specialize in clinical social work. Clinical specializations are also available in other countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Israel. It also exists in a smaller scale in other countries, such as my own country, South Africa. In South America, Chile's got very highly regulated training for master's degree social work in clinical practice, and Poland has that too. And this is either at a master's degree level or through post-qualification processes. The nature of clinical social work education and practice varies from country to country, depending on professional regulations and educational contexts. Now, this is very important to understand, that when you do get a qualification or work as a social worker, you have to embrace an attitude of lifelong learning within your area of specialization, whether it's pursuing an advanced degree or more certificate or diploma level training courses. And as I pointed out, there are many opportunities to focus on a specialization, such as relationship and couples counseling, for example. To talk more about the context of clinical social work, in countries where clinical social work education is readily available, the specialization is often recognized as a health-related profession, and the practitioners can find jobs specifically designed as clinical social work positions. So in hospitals or in psychiatric clinics, in part of a multidisciplinary team, you'd work as a clinical social worker in collaboration with the psychologists and the psychiatrists, nurses, and doctors. Unlike other areas of social work practice, clinical social work may be highly regulated. And if your country doesn't have regulation, maybe the social work associations in line, or those that are formed as part of the IASSW or the International Federation of Social Work, can start a journey of ensuring that social workers adhere to the ethics and norms and standards of social work practice, and that ultimately the education is more professionalized and regulated, so that ultimately social workers practice ethically and for the best interest of their clients. To be registered or licensed, clinical social work practitioners obtain an advanced degree in clinical social work from an educational program that is accredited. They may complete many hours of supervised clinical practice or pass clinical social work exams. So in South Africa, we've got a regulatory body, the South African Council for Social Service Professions. All social workers have to be registered. They've got specializations in social work, either forensic social work, school social work, or clinical social work, among others. These regulatory and accreditation bodies will serve several functions, including to ensure that the practitioners meet the established requirements in relation to the education, practice, competence, and follow the code of ethics for the profession. They ensure that the regulated practitioners engage in ongoing professional development. We call it CPD, continuous professional development, including emerging research evidence to keep up with new developments and integrate them into practice. I gave you an example earlier that during the course of this week, on Monday, all the South African social workers, in fact, over 700, attended a CPD points, continuous professional development points training held by our national body on ecometric assessment in mental health settings and in child settings. More importantly is the regulatory body may also discipline practitioners found guilty of practices that violate the code of ethics and other standards and guidelines for practice. Now, in some countries, we don't have that. And it's would be incumbent on social workers in your own countries to hold each other to account to a high level of practice, that you are caring for your clients in the highest regard, and that there's no abuse of power in this imbalanced relationship that you bring in as clinical social workers. So finally, the international definition of clinical social work even talks about employment settings. In countries where clinical social work is established as an occupation, practitioners find employment in various settings. For instance, they may hold clinical social work positions in hospitals, in mental health organizations, and in other welfare agencies delivering services related to loss, trauma, domestic violence, substance abuse, and in my case, my research, they're organizations where practitioners work with relationships and couples and even marriage settings. Some clinical social workers are self-employed, and in South Africa, you have to register as a social worker in private practice. Private practice social workers can deliver social work services to their clients for a fee. In some contexts, those fees would even be reimbursed and paid for by public and private insurance companies. So people with a medical aid scheme membership in South Africa can come to me as a clinical social worker, and I can invoice them and they can claim back their fees from their medical insurance, because the practice is so highly regulated and well regarded. So that concludes my component in talking about the IASSW's definition of clinical social work. And I really wanted to lay the foundation of what a clinical social worker is, the theoretical orientation, and the context for practice. And I'm hoping that this will be something that you can build on as you listen to all the other presentations and lectures that you'll be feasting on for the next 2 days. So now I want to talk a little bit about 2 pieces of research, and I'm going to try and keep this very brief. But first, my master's research was titled The Strengths of Enduring Marriages That Overcame Severe Stress. There were 56 individuals who had been married for an average of 41 years. They participated in hermeneutic phenomenological research describing the strengths of their marriages. These couples responded to a newspaper call and were asked to attribute their marriage endurance to a number of interconnected factors. And these factors are described in the diagram below. The descriptions of their covenant commitment on the one hand were offset by the fact that the divorce was not an option on the other hand. Remember that being married for 41 years puts them in the age group of being about 70 and 80 years old. And for that cohort, like in many shame-based cultures, for example, the Japanese and Chinese literature that I used, described the fact that marriage was not an option and people just had to find themselves later on, find their partner again in later life. Determination as a conscious choosing to succeed, a choosing not to fail, was seen as the implementation of the marriage covenant. This was facilitated by their religious worldview, their faith worldview, and in fact, in South Africa, all of these participants attributed to their Christian worldview. They attributed this also to their positive communication abilities and to a desire for companionship and active love. And this research really formed the foundation to much of my clinical practice and desire to help couples in distress, and also formed the foundation for work in pre-marriage settings. My PhD work was slightly different. Yeah, we looked at people who'd been married for many times. In fact, the example that I can give you is one of my participants had been engaged to be married 6 times. 4 of those engagements actually materialized in marriage. She was married 4 times, not at the same time. She wasn't married to 4 people at the same time. She was married 4 different times, and they were significantly long marriages. Her first marriage was almost 20 years long before her husband died, and she got remarried to a man that broke her heart, and she had to get divorced from him. Then she had another divorce from a 3rd husband, and then later in life she had a long-term marriage, and that ended because her husband died. But this research tried to explore the development of the marital life course perspective as a conceptual framework for describing and understanding marital life events and marital transitions. It was guided by the life course perspective by Glenn Elder, and drew on phenomenological analysis, Jonathan Smith's concept, and concept analysis as a theoretical approach. Over 130 academic works that use the term the marital life course in their texts constituted a literature data set for the concept analysis. That tracked the theoretical development of the idea of the marital life course perspective from 1980. And then the residents of retirement centers and old age homes in my home city where I used to live until 4 years ago, called East London in South Africa. All of these participants were over 65 years old. They were invited to share their stories and retrospective histories of their relationship experiences, about their multiple marriage life events and the marital transitions that shaped their marital life course. I interviewed 16 women about their many marital stories and their changes in their transitions, and had all of these women had been previously married more than once and were currently single because of either divorce or the death of their husbands. This empirical data was analyzed using IPA, and after the empirical data was analyzed and the textual literature concept analysis was analyzed, there was a synthesis, and over many months we developed a very succinct definition of the marital life course perspective, which is a conceptual framework for describing and understanding marital life events and marital transitions. The marital life course is a subset of the existing theory for the life course perspective, and it seeks to understand all stages of the marital experience within the wider social and cultural contexts, which are shaped by the historical dimensions of the cohort's specific time and geographic location. The marital life events include, but are not limited to, marriage status changes. An individual may experience multiple marriage life events throughout their life, each with associated role transitions that vary according to their temporality and the individuals whose lives are linked to the marital experience. Finally, well-being and transition outcomes across marital life course may be promoted or impeded by the interplay of risk and protective factors and agency-related capacity or resilience. So I hope that I have met my mandate, that I have introduced the audience in this conference to the definition of clinical social work that was developed by the International Association of Schools of Social Work and released in 2023. I hope that I've also been able to give some ideas of how this definition can be used to enhance practice in clinical settings directed at couples and relationship interventions. So I want to thank the organizers and Carolina. I want to wish you well for the rest of the Congress, and I'm open to take some questions now. I know I've gone over time. Back to you, Carolina. Thank you very much.
Hi, John. Thank you very much with this subject, no, which is very important for all social workers, as you said. And well, it's in Latin America, at least, is in some countries, it's a little the clinical social worker have some troubles, no, with the profession still, and well, and we are just trying to people know, no, even in Peru, for example, we don't have courses in universities, no, in or postgraduates, no masters, no doctorates. So but some organizations now, as CAPA, there is a Peruvian institute also, and Chilean institute also is trying to doing something to teach, you know, in Spanish to the Latin American people. And your perspective really is a very complex, no, with the families, no, and how is the intervention in your country, when in America also, no, in the United States is a big percentage that the Americans has are licensed, with certifications, you know. And how is not this? How is possible that in America, North America, the people, yeah, o sea, everything is normal, o sea, the studies, they have masters, doctorates, and even work, but still in other countries, is it's not yet, all this development of the clinical social work. What do you think about this problem?
Yeah.
Why not yet?
Carolina, you touching on a very important issue, and there's a rising tide of recognizing social work as a formal and independent profession across the world. We heard earlier from Japan, where work with disabilities is done in so many, by so many different professions, including teachers and even people from a religious background. And this is true in many, many countries around the world. But they still call the work that they do welfare work, social work, and are associated to this profession of social work, even though they may find themselves beyond the confines of what we traditionally in the West call the Anglo-American frame of reference, or the British influence in the Commonwealth. And slowly but surely, there's a recognition in many countries that want social work to be recognized as an independent, standalone profession. And ultimately, we've seen a number of countries go through a parliamentary or a national government process of having social work regulated and recognized, and establishing regulatory bodies or councils. That's not the only way to go. I really think that every country needs to find their own way forward, that there's strength in association. People working in the welfare space who call themselves social workers should look for the International Federation of Schools, International Federation of Social Work. Their associations are very strong in most countries, as is the IASSW, has got chapters and universities that are part of the International Association of Schools of Social Work. And those are just two examples of organizations that can help on the ground to help social workers find themselves, ultimately to ensure ethical practice and high-level training of practitioners. I think it's very important that you look at the way this definition was developed. I want to read it to you again from the website. It says, the IASSW encourages national and regional amplifications that are in accordance with the spirit and the intent of the statement. And I think that is cross-cutting for social work practice itself, to find local interpretations of social work that is practiced by practitioners who are morally and ethically committed to their own development, their own training, so that they provide the best possible service. And so even if your country doesn't have specific postgraduate master's degree or regulation, I call on each person in this helping profession field to read, to go and get certification training, whether it's from organizations like CAPA or the Gotham Institute or any other service provider that can train you in your specialization. So I don't know if that answers your question, Carolina, but I think there's lots of space for local interpretation and regional amplification of this statement. Thank you.
Many thanks, John.